Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this afternoon to talk in our mergers and acquisition series of webinars. Today, we're talking about working capital and how it kind of works its way into M&A transaction. Um, just to introduce myself, my name is Stan Doida. I'm a co-founder of Doida Crow Legal here in Denver, Colorado. We help entrepreneurs grow, finance, and buy and sell businesses. I think mergers and acquisitions tends to be a little over half of what we do here. Our kind of targeted transactions are buy-side engagements, usually between $1 and $10 million, and our sell-side engagements tend to be 5 to 100 million. I would call that, middle market, lower middle market area. And so that's the kind of perspective that I bring when I talk about this topic of working capital. Let's dive right into it. We don't have too much time, and I want to make good use of our time here. And please, if there's questions, I don't readily see any questions here, so I'll try to keep my eye open for them. But if you have questions, please shoot them in there, and we'll address them as soon as I can. Great. So what is working capital? For any business owner, there is probably working capital that's happening in your business. It is working capital is the lifeblood of a business. It's keeping the business on track, and it's usually a mix of, in its simplest definition, it's the difference between current assets and current liabilities. Current assets, that being cash, liquid securities in some cases, accounts receivable in a lot of cases, and maybe some prepaid expenses, things like insurance that you have paid, you're using, that you're consuming, sort of those current assets over the course of time. Current liabilities, it's often payroll, the monthly expenses, think rent, accounts payable, vendors, that sort of stuff. And so really what working capital is, it's the short-term liquidity, like we're measuring the short-term liquidity of a company and its operational efficiency. But I like to think about it as it's the capital that's required to get through kind of a cash cycle of the business. So I'll take my business, for example. If I get a new client today, we start working on it today or tomorrow, and we work on it. At the end of this month, we'll send out an invoice for all the work we've done during this month. That invoice will get paid in 30, 40 days. But meanwhile, I've paid all of my employees, I've paid for rent, I've paid for insurance, I've paid for all sorts of things that have been expensed during that period of time. And working capital is it's the cash that's needed to kind of fill that gap between the time we start working on something from the time we get paid on something. And everybody's working capital and cash cycle is different. There's certainly businesses out there that might take 90 plus 180 days to get paid. And that's just a much more working capital that's needed to kind of bridge that gap. Like I said, the kind of basics are current assets minus current liabilities equal your working capital. Like we said, the key components: cash, accounts receivable, payables, short-term debt. When we get to an M&A transaction, usually, a lower middle market or middle market transaction might say, hey, we're going to buy your company on a cash-free and debt-free basis with normal levels of working capital and normal level of working capital. And determining what normal is has some science behind it, has some math behind it. We're looking at historical financials, industry benchmarks. We might even be looking at working capital tends to be more as you're growing. You may are incurring more upfront expenses, and so you may need more working capital in a growth phase than you do maybe a stagnant phase. And so, the normalization kind of helps level the playing field and say what the business truly needs to bridge that period of time. So like I said, in the M&A context, you're going to, in the lower middle market and middle market transactions, it's very frequent that a buyer is going to say, I want your company on a cash-free, debt-free basis, as I mentioned, with normal levels of working capital. The idea is the buyer wants to be able to step in to that business and be able to operate it for, at least one cash cycle to kind of get it up and on its feet and transitioned over. So, buyers' interest in having that normal levels of working capital, it reduces the amount that they need to bring to the business in order to successfully transition it from, the seller to the buyer. And it keeps, sort of helps keep everything, working the way it has been working. I'll say this. I think, depending on the mix of attendees here, working capital may or may not be a part of your transaction or your prospective transaction. You'll notice that I've mentioned kind of the middle market and the lower middle market as it being, I think, kind of normal. There we are seeing, I would define that lower middle market as kind of starting at 5 million. I think that's kind of the bottom end of the middle market. And it goes, up to hundreds of millions of dollars. But in that space, a buyer might be paying a multiple, they're determining the enterprise value usually on EBITDA or sometimes revenue, but in an EBITDA situation, you might be seeing multiples that are 5x, 6x, 7x, 8x, even higher, multiples of EBITDA. And when a buyer is paying, that kind of a multiple, I think working capital becomes pretty standard in the transaction. For those that might be buying or selling in the, what I'd call Main Street area of the spectrum here, working capital becomes less common. There you might be paying 2, 2.5, 3, maybe 4 on the outer ends of a buyer might be paying, 2 to 4x on EBITDA there. And there it becomes sort of less common that working capital is there. And I see there's a question on here. I'm about to get to it. It's, if a buyer is using an SBA loan, it's even less common that you can use working capital in a traditional way. So I see there's a question. I see the note that SBA loans, are you not able to increase or decrease the seller note on working capital? I think the answer to that is you are able to decrease the note, but you are not able to increase the note. And so what the question is getting at is really the next section of how we figure out working capital, how it all works in the deal. So again, let's stick with the kind of lower to middle market transaction there where you're buying, cash-free, debt-free, normal levels of working capital. Usually what's going to happen is the buyer and the seller are going to come to an agreement about what the target or peg working capital is. And that will be the goal for the seller to hit at closing. So if we say, let's just arbitrarily come up with a company, let's just give an example. We're selling this company at 10 million bucks. And we have all agreed that the normal levels of working capital are 1 million. Well, first of all, that peg kind of functions as a deduction to net purchase price. for the seller. So really, all things held equal, that seller is selling for $1 million less because they're going to leave $1 million of of working capital in the business for the buyer to take. So understand that. These things are determined through Q of E reports, financial data. Again, some industry norms might apply. But at closing, there's usually one of two things happen. Either at closing, the seller says, okay, we're 2 days before closing. I'm going to project out my balance sheet and I'm going to tell you what I think in 2 days my current assets and current liabilities are going to be, and what therefore is my working capital. So let's say the seller does that and their calculation comes up with 1.1 million is their net working capital. That would essentially mean that the buyer is going to have to add $100,000 in cash to, pay the seller for that extra 100,000 they're getting. Conversely, if it shows up as $900,000, the buyer is going to reduce their cash at closing by $100,000 to compensate for that. So that's the one way is you project out, and then usually 60, 90, 120 days after closing, the parties will reconcile the balance sheet. Balance sheets are, you kind of have to look at them after all the transactions have settled to truly understand what has happened. So you let some time pass, you reconcile the balance sheet, and you say, okay, were we right about our estimates? And if we were wrong one way or the other, there's a true up process that happens where cash is exchanged between buyer and seller. And if you hit it right on, then nothing needs to change. But there usually is some adjustment that is happening, whether it's significant or nominal. I mentioned there were two ways. That the first way is, you project out. You kind of do a premature settle up, and then you do a reconciliation full settle up after closing. The second way is you don't do that pre-closing estimation, and you just do a full settle up after closing. But yeah, I see another question. How often do you see AR, inventory, AP included in a transaction? Not often in that $2 to $5 million space. I mean, it does happen, but I do think it greatly complicates what should be a very simple deal. I think it is a sophisticated tool that sometimes applies to unsophisticated sellers. And frankly, I think it could make your offer look worse compared to another offer. How would you handle working capital in a business that has high amounts of working capital relative to the purchase price? Example, 3 million, purchase price of 1 million. Again, if you're in that lower middle market, if you're in that Main Street kind of sub 5 million and you're using an SBA loan, my suggestion to you is that you just simplify and adjust the purchase price. You're gonna probably need to bring your own working capital, or get a working capital loan as part of your SBA loan facility. Hope that answers your question. I saw somebody with a hand raised, but I'm not really sure how to call on you. If you could just type your question in, that would probably be helpful to me. All right, so we talked a little bit about working capital and then how to adjust it. We talked about this 30, 90 days after the fact, we're reconciling the balance sheet. Again, usually in that process, the post-closing reconciliation, the buyer is usually saying, okay, well, we've looked at the numbers. Here's what we show as what the balance sheet should have been. And the discrepancies are usually trued up. Then there's usually a dispute resolution process there too. If the seller disagrees, they have a certain number of days to say, hey, I disagree with your assessment. Here's why. Here's what I think the number should be. And then there's an opportunity for them to work it out. And if they can't work it out, most typically I see a third-party independent accounting firm who's appointed to kind of do the final reconciliation and come up with the final numbers there. All right. Let's see here. We're nearing the end of our coverage here, because I think there's only so much to talk about here. So I'm happy to, again, answer questions or things that maybe are still confusing to anybody. But I'll say this, some of the common things I see in the lower middle market transactions, the challenges I see, usually the PEG, the amount of what working capital is going to be, it's a pretty material term. And unfortunately, I'll always tell my clients, listen, we want to get on both the buy side and the sell side, we want to get the most material terms settled at letter of intent. This is about the only term that I find almost never gets settled at letter of intent. And it comes later in the process once diligence is kind of wrapping up. But that number, whatever it is, whatever the buyer says, hey, this is what I think the PEG is, that can create some friction in the transactions, especially if it's a significant number. I mean, we've certainly seen transactions where we've liked the purchase price, we've liked the payment terms, we've liked all the other things, but the working capital comes in substantially higher, which, like I said, comes in with it's just a net negative to the purchase price for the seller. So having that too high can be a real jagged pill to swallow. Trying to find out that PEG as early as possible is always a good practice. It's good for both buyer and seller. Make sure you got the terms kind of on the rails as you're in the heat of the deal there. I also see there's often businesses with trends, seasonal trends. This season is a slower, so we have less revenue. Maybe we need less working capital because we shed temporary employees, et cetera. But you got to adjust for the seasonality, and then you also have to kind of contemplate when that closing is going to happen and what season that's going to happen. Likewise, I see clients on kind of both ends of this spectrum, but it's not uncommon for a seller to just leave massive and far too much working capital in their company just because they've just been conservative about cash needs and just keeping it in the business, et cetera. That starts to inflate what it looks like your current assets truly need to be. And so, really getting an understanding of what is necessary versus what has historically been there is also an important thing to kind of just understand. And then, like I said, on the other side, you might see somebody who just pulls out too much and leaves the business running real thin. And a buyer needs to kind of adjust for that and just be mindful of it. I see a question in here says, what language should you suggest to include in the LOI to address the working capital terms? I think the most common language I see there is just is maybe how it's determined. Maybe it's determined on a 12-month average. Maybe it's determined on a longer time horizon. But you want to understand. So I guess my answer to your question would be, if I'm a seller, I might say, we'll give you normalized levels of working capital based on a 12-month trailing average of what working capital is. But I think when it comes to LOI, with as long as you're kind of talking about normal levels of working capital, that I think the adjustment is really truly implicit among parties who are doing that sort of thing. So I don't know that you need to go into too many terms. I would say I did have a deal recently where the true up was happening a year after, which I think was much longer than needed. And so, I think you do kind of want to just make sure that the true up is going to happen within a normal level of normal period of time, which I would call within that 60 to 120 days. If somebody says they're going to true it up in 90 days, I really have no objection to that, generally speaking, buy side or sell side. Yeah, but again, best practices with working capital, when you get to the purchase agreement, is just really making sure that you are defining what current assets and current liabilities are. For example, I've got transactions where it's quite normal for accounts receivable to go long past 90 days. And a buyer might say, hey, we're not going to count any AR past 90 days. And so, understanding things like that about the business are important when you get to the purchase agreement in determining how are we defining what working capital actually is. But again, to the question, to the point of the attendee there who asked the question, I don't know that I see that level of granularity going into the LOI that frequently. Maybe if there's some really extraordinary things that you need to really kind of convey to somebody there, then maybe it's appropriate. But again, usually the extent of LOI terms on working capital are normal levels of working capital and maybe how it's measured over a period of time. And then again, like I said, for sellers going into a transaction, understanding your financials, and a lot of sellers that we work with, particularly in that lower middle market, they're cash basis taxpayers. They might be cash basis accounting as well. And I think if you're working with an intermediary, like an investment banker or a broker, there might be a discussion, ahead of time in kind of converting your financials over to an accrual basis. Because the cash basis of accounting, you're not going to see things like AR and AP on your balance sheet. So, understanding your financials again from an accrual basis going into a transaction is hugely important. So, do that work early. I remember getting advice that I thought was, at the time, I thought, wow, that was harsh and maybe not necessary. But there was an entrepreneur who said in a panel once that I don't even think you have a real business if you don't have accrual accounting. And I don't know if it's that extreme of a rule there, but I do think if you're going to sell your business, even if you're a cash basis taxpayer, it's probably time to start working on getting your financials into an accrual basis so that you can look at it and understand what it truly means from current assets, current liabilities measured kind of under GAAP or accrual basis accounting. So listen, that's really all I have on the topic. I realize it might be somewhat of an elusive topic to a lot of you. I think in practice it ends up being a little simpler than it sounds. And so, the process of resolving this stuff and figuring it out and determining it is relatively consistent from deal to deal. I don't see widely changing terms or procedures on how we determine what working capital is at closing. Now, I will say I'm not terribly involved in the determination of what is normal level working, normal levels of working capital for a business. And that's really where accounting professionals, quality of earnings sort of analysis, audits, that sort of stuff are going to be more useful in kind of really figuring out what working capital is needed to, run the business through these cash cycles. So at this point, I'll open up for any questions. But otherwise, I will thank you all for attending, taking some time out of your day here to join us and to learn a little bit more. Of course, if you have a transaction buy side or sell side that you need some help with, we would love to be a part of that and help you get a deal closed. Let us know how we can help. Oh, I see. Oh, sorry, I didn't scroll down. I see a handful more questions. I see one more question. I think the rub on working capital is adjusting purchase price probably won't work because of how much competition there is for businesses as their asking price. If you come in below ask, you're not going to have a winning LOI. Any thoughts? Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I listen, I think if you're in that Main Street level of business, again, they call it sub $5 million. I think complicating a deal is only going to make your offer look worse. And I think that there is extreme competition for good businesses in that segment. So I do think starting to ask for bells and whistles on things like working capital, make your offer look worse. And yeah, I do also tell, buyers that, especially if price gets bid up beyond a rational thing, there's a lot of pressure for buyers to just, make it what I call a dumber offer. And you have to resist the urge to make dumber offers as well. So, and he said, the other issue I see is limited information by broker complicates these issues and ends up in a broken or retraded LOI. Yeah, again, I think at the middle market level, your ask or your offer in a buy side transaction is largely going to be based on the purchase price, payment terms, and maybe some of the post-closing stuff like employment terms, rollover equity, that sort of stuff. Working capital, like I said, is mostly an afterthought in those sorts of transactions. It's just part of the deal. When you're in that sub 5 million, I don't think it is part of the deal. And so yes, I can see it creating a lot of problems because again, the smaller the business, maybe not always, but the smaller the business, maybe the less sophisticated the seller. This becomes a complex concept for a lot of them. Next question was what then do companies in smaller deals do with working capital prior to the deal closing? Well, if you're a seller, you keep it. Most transactions in that sub $5 million space are asset purchases. So you're buying particular assets and you're usually excluding cash, AR, and all of the liabilities, including AP, which would be part of working capital. So yeah, usually the seller is keeping their working capital. And again, when you're selling your business at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times EBITDA, giving up your working capital is not that big of a deal. But when you're selling it at 2, 3, maybe 4 at the outer edges, working capital ends up becoming a significant percentage of that. How would you determine what's necessary for working beyond looking what has historically been there? Again, that's probably a better question for somebody who does like quality of earnings and sort of analysis. So, again, I don't get my skill set is not determining what working capital is necessary to run that business. I would leave that to the accounting professionals. My role in this is understanding how it fits into the bigger deal, making sure it's being addressed appropriately and kind of being handled at closing correctly and at reconciliation correctly. Yes, we can share the slides. Just email us and we'll get them on over to you. It's 12:29. We used up just about every minute. So in any event, I really appreciate y'all coming. I don't have any more questions, so I will bid you all adieu. And again, let us know if we can be of any assistance to you. Have a good day.